most part, I loved this episode. However, there's one big thing that they did that might have jumped the dragon. What's with all these different franchises seemingly like doing something ridiculous? Although in both cases, we'll see how they play out. But good news and bad news. Stuff finally happened this episode, yet a lot of it was ridiculous. Of course, the most ridiculous by far and away was Daemon literally putting his hand on George R.R. Martin's face, carved into the weirwood tree at Harrenhal. I recently watched an excellent behind-the-scenes piece, much longer than the ones that they air after the episode on HBO. This is again on the Game of Thrones YouTube channel, and they confirmed that is intentionally George R.R. Martin's face in the tree. And so Daemon puts his hand on George R.R. Martin's forehead and finds out he's in a book or hit HBO show. By the way, clearly House of the Dragon is missing the big, striking fantasy moments that really put Game of Thrones on the map. I mean, sure, as many of you have pointed out, it had smaller moments, great writing and drama, but make no mistake, what really made the headlines and that was the attention grabber for Game of Thrones were these amazing fantasy moments, headlines, sprinkled throughout each season. Especially like the end of season 1 with Ned Stark and with what happened with Dany. I mean, those were really big things. And I think that clearly that's something that's been missing from House of the Dragon. For some reason, they decided to make House of the Dragon, even though it's wall-to-wall dragons, well, it's getting there, but try to make it more realistic. We're going to talk about the ending at the end of this episode, but it was amazing. I'll just say here, speaking of meta, that I pretty much felt like the end of this episode was like the show's pitch to Warner Brothers Discovery to please give us more money so we can do this right. And I thought it was an excellent pitch. I think if you show those 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes to Zazie, executives have a notoriously short attention span. You give them those short few minutes, and hopefully everybody's talking about it on the social medias. He'll up the budget. I mean, this was only an 8-episode season as opposed to 10 for season 1, 10 episodes. And I think clearly we can see what the final 2 episodes this season should have been. That's right. I'm talking a 2-episode battle for King's Landing, man. Give it to me. Give it to me. I need it. All right. So yes, back to this ridiculous knowing that they're in a book thing that they've put into the show. I mean, Helena seems to know it too. And Alice, obviously. But Helena? I mean, obviously we had Bran, who was a seer, and other characters who could see the past, the present, and the future. But they didn't know they were in a book. I think Daemon literally says, we're characters in a story. And then when Helena started talking to Aemond, it was like she'd been spending, he just caught her after she'd spent some time on Wiki of Westros. I was like, spoilers, Helena, spoilers. When she started talking about God's Eye, I was like, some people have made it very clear they don't want to hear about stuff that's coming up. And, what are you doing, Helena? I got nervous for some of you. How did you feel when she started doing that? And kind of again, giving major spoilers for the show. Speaking of a choice, I mean, I don't know why the showrunner Condrel would do that. It's just such a weird choice. Now, speaking of strong choices, it was also a choice to make Alicent sell out her own team, which is a huge change from the books. She stays and remains loyal to her house forever in the books. I mean, I don't want to give anything away, but there's nothing to draw on for this. This is totally new territory. But from a writing perspective, this is interesting to me. So from a writing perspective, it really bookends season 2 beautifully because Alicent ends up making the exact same choice at the end of the season that Helena had to make at the beginning of the season. She has to choose between a son and a daughter, which should die so that the other can truly live. And she makes the exact same choice. Both she and Helena go to save their daughters, just as they both are deciding. I thought that was great. Both are deciding to get out of this game. They're like, I don't want to play anymore. And I loved it. I loved the moment when Allison was very Thelma and Louise, right? Although the opposite of Thelma and Louise, I guess, because they're disengaging. But Allison was like, how would you feel if we just kind of left? And I like the Helena was like, where would we go? And I was like, sleepover vibes. This is fantastic. I was like, go ladies, make a run for it. So by the fact that they made the same choice, right? I think that either absolves Helena to a degree, makes them both look awful, maybe both, maybe a little of both, or a third option, and maybe it's all three, shows the reality of gender politics in Game of Thrones and this time period. Because on that note, it's fascinating that while the men's men charge into battle, even knowing that it means certain death. And by the way, it does seem that as he's about to die, Cole his eyes have finally been opened to how futile and naive his fantasies have been. And he finally understands how the world really works. And he just wishes that he could spend his days with Alicent. I felt sorry for Cole. Even Gwaine did. And he just figured out that Cole was sleeping with his sister. But I think the finality that they're both facing was very sobering. And I think that considering this is just one little scene, the fact that the show sold that finality that was facing them so effectively, so kudos to the writing, the directing, and the acting, that was impressive. So again, when Alicent's like, I'm making a run for it, I'm taking my daughter and we're hightailing it out of here, I was like, you know what? Swing by and pick up Cole, you know? Like, you sweet, naive, crazy kids, you go live your lives. And neither one of you ever should have been in power. You have no business in politics. But Larys Strong, though, continues to be an excellent politician. A lot of people are getting their own hands, their own advisors. And even though he's officially the master of whispers, I think Larys has promoted himself to Aegon's hand after Aemond said, no, thank you. But yeah, Larys and Aegon, because this is fascinating to me, Larys has had to learn and Aegon is learning how to be a different kind of man because of circumstances that have been forced upon them. They're not men's men, but in some ways they're more powerful and more and can be survivors, right? Because I was so proud of Larys that he managed to talk Aegon into sneaking out of King's Landing. He did it by appealing to Aegon's ego, but that's fine. Change takes time. And I was so proud of both of them that they lived to fight another day. Because it turns out Aemond isn't the only one who wants Aegon dead. So does his mom. And to think she had looked at Aemond with disgust just a few episodes earlier. But maybe he gets his murderous streak from her. Or hey, when the chips are down, it was rough in medieval times. They had Pepsi, but no flatware. Cable guy joke. Okay. I'm not sure how book readers will feel about this change to Alicent, but simply from the perspective of the show itself, I like this change, as I said. Alicent turning on Team Green. The only thing I really don't like is the awareness of being in a book, which I don't see how anybody could be in favor of. But this, although making this big change the characters shouldn't be aware that they're in a book, but defy the books at your own peril, because every time this show has gone significantly off book, it has gotten into trouble. If Condell can stick the landing and, maybe chart his own course, that would be impressive. But so far, no one has been able to do so. All right. George R. R. Martin's in a tree for a reason, man. But wow, did Alicent look amazing. We have to take a second and talk about how incredible she looked. 10 hair, 10 outfit. I was like, where's that been in your closet all this time, Allison? She's like, I'm wearing what I want finally. I can't take it anymore. And she looked so good. Fierce fantasy. Ever since her walk in the woods, she has been on a different show, like a King Arthur show. I love it. And that's the fantasy I was just talking about with Game of Thrones. Don't be afraid of the fantasy dial, Condell. Turn it up a bit. I think this show could use a little bit more fantasy. Because she just looks so good. All right, another ramification of making Alicent behind the fall of King's Landing is that in the books, it was the Gold Cloaks who were the inside man for this, so to speak. And that was due to their loyalty to Daemon. So by switching it to Alicent, and I suspect this is why they did it, this makes Rhaenyra and her connections more crucial and more central to this huge Team Black victory. And you can see, obviously, with this episode, the show centralizing Rhaenyra and making sure that she is at the head of House Black, Team Black. And I think House Targaryen. And I can understand that. And for the most part, I really love the way it was done. And we'll talk about her and Daemon in a moment. But first, I want to talk Rhaenyra and Allison. And, Ryan Condal said that he brought them back together because fans wanted to see it. And some fans have been like, no, I didn't want to see it. But now that you have, what did you think? And I must say that the 2 times that they've gotten together this season have really been phenomenal scenes. I've loved them quite a bit. And it really here solidified them as the center of the story, right? Like as they were in season 1. And just like the posters have been promising. And we've been often saying it while we discussed season 2, where are Rhaenyra and Allison? This show is supposed to be about them. And I think, again, this season 2 finale refocused, recentered them in the show. I mean, even at the end of the episode, they mirror each other as the true representatives of this battle. But yet, so opposite. I mean, I love the way this was set up. So one is a queen seeking to grab power outright, but the other cast aside by the men in her life. Like all the men, isn't that interesting? All the men are finally rallying behind Rhaenyra. She's getting the support, the opposite of what happened to Alicent, right? So Rhaenyra's out front, head of House Black, Team Black, but yet Alicent has been cast aside, but yet she still is controlling Team Green by subterfuge, right? So from secret. Both women incredibly powerful. I think that's amazing. And look at this symbolism in the shots, right? Alicent is out in the open, finally free, broken out of the Game of Thrones. She's like, again, as I said, I don't want to play anymore. While Rhaenyra, this is so interesting. She is seen amongst the scrolls of her bloodline. Remember, that's the room that she's in, the history of the Targaryens, right? Very much on a game board. I mean, you could very obviously say that this is like reminiscent of a chessboard. And the queens, by the way, are often argued to be the most powerful pieces on the board, right? And so Rhaenyra is very much on the board, but at the same time, you could also argue that she is another cog in the great Targaryen wheel, of the bloodline, and that she's perhaps potentially trapped in the game, right? I mean, it was really, really amazingly well done. I mean, really, really strong symbolism. Now, let's talk Daemon and Rhaenyra. And I was touched when he finally bent the knee to her. Challengers, House of the Dragon style. I was like, oh, what's going to happen with Mysaria? And Daemon pledged his truly massive army to her. That was impressive. And that turncoat sure turned around and made a run for it. He better. I think he should have been killed a long time ago. We'll also talk about Ulf. I got me a kill list. I think Rhaenyra desperately needs a kill list. But anyway, I do wish that Daemon had learned, or we had seen him learn, that Rhaenyra had activated so many dragons to show that they'd both been busy and they'd both done good. And that at the end of the day, they were a formidable team, that they are a true power couple. I mean, in some ways, it seemed like this scene was supposed to be about Daemon's submission to Rhaenyra. I mean, we've so heard bend the knee in Game of Thrones so much, it's kind of like ingrained in us at this point. So whenever we see it, we're like, well, we did the thing. But I would have liked it to be played more like an acknowledgement, again, as I said, of them being such a wonderful team. And then number 2 is a great spot to be in. It's just one below number 1, Daemon. And you can live a great life there. And sometimes, everybody has their part to play in the game. And what's most important is that your team is successful. And so how can you get that done? And so I wish they'd had that moment where they've both been like, you've been busy, and they're both like, I'm impressed with what you've accomplished. That would have been just so nice. Like, even though Rhaenyra is technically the queen, I don't think that needs to be emasculating or demeaning for Daemon in the way that he has thought that it would be. And, the show sometimes makes it seem. It's funny that a lot of what's going on here, particularly with this episode, with support Rhaenyra, it's reminding me so much of some of the scenes from The Crown, right? About how the royal family must all rally behind the queen, their own ambitions and feelings aside. Because, everybody, they're kind of playing the Game of Thrones in the British royal family too, which is hilarious. But, to preserve the monarchy as a united front. And here, Daemon finally understands that in order for their team to function properly, they need to get behind not just a single leader that they all agree upon, but one that is not too aggressive a figure. So that the idea of the monarch is palatable to the nobility and also to the general public. You want them to feel comfortable with the monarch. And I think Daemon's kind of realizing that his ambition is not only unchecked, but, he saw that it made him a very unpopular ruler. And what he had formerly seen as a weakness in Rhaenyra, possibly is actually a strength that he does not possess. So when you think about it, House of the Dragon, the Rhaenyra scenes at least, really are echoing The Crown, which is so funny because Matt Smith played basically the same role there as well as Prince Philip, going on a very similar journey to quell his own ambitions and emotion, submitting to a woman, all for the sake of the monarchy. So I think that's very amusing. The Crown, great show. So the only things I did not like about the Daemon and Rhaenyra sequences was the Daemon, again, partially doing this all because he suddenly realizes he's in a book, right? And this is how the story has been written. What does that make Alice, the narrator, the librarian of House of the Dragon? I will say, though, it's good for Daemon to have his own advisor. Alice has kind of become his hand, and I think he's benefited from it greatly. And it's kind of sad that no one has ever advised Daemon his entire life. Not a parent, not a sibling, because, he hasn't really had a really good positive romantic relationship. He's had no one to advise him, looking out for him. And I think that's taken a toll. And so I think Alice is, wouldn't it be wonderful if they didn't have a romantic connection, if she just became like a really good friend and advisor to him? That would be a nice thing to see on the show. And it would also show further growth for Daemon. And also, when Rhaenyra says her husband sounds like her father. Oh, he does, to be fair, right? But it reminded me that Daemon is also Rhaenyra's uncle, and that the weird casting of this show, that is the character's age, some actors are swapped out, some are not, that it hides the fact that Daemon is supposed to be closer to her father in age than Rhaenyra, that he's really of that much older generation. So I was like, let's not bring that up. All right, now, something I really want to talk about is activated dragons and their riders. What the heck's going on with Ulf? I mean, he feels like a totally different character. I mean, I can understand that he's excited about his incredible good luck and new station in life, especially because, changing stations, was simply something that did not happen to the small folk, obviously. But in his earlier scenes, he did not seem like the total jerk that he does now. So you're just like, where's this coming from? It just seems just because the writers decided to do it. And speaking of the books, Hugh has had a total personality transplant as well. It would almost seem as if they're giving Hugh's storyline to Ulf. Still, it was odd that Ulf was so aggressive towards Jace, when earlier this very season he was telling everybody at the bar that while he supports Rhaenyra, he ultimately wants to see Jace on the throne, on the Iron Throne. So of course, Jace is rude, so Ulf might not like him so much, but when he first meets him, he should be excited because that's been his guy. I mean, to put your feet up on the meeting table it just the fact that Ulf's not dead is to me shocking. I mean, I think any number of people who worked there would have been like, he had a horrible accident because he was out of control. Jace, though, played this all wrong. I was like, Jace, you were doing so well, but he's really fumbling. These new dragon riders are excited about their new station. They don't understand nobility. This is a new world to them. Why be a wet blanket? And also, don't you want these men to ride for you, to die for you, to support your own claim to the throne? They got to feel there's something in it for them. I mean, I'm just surprised that Jace, because he seemed savvy before, and all of a sudden he doesn't know what he's doing. And although maybe he gets this from his mom, because I thought Rhaenyra played this very poorly as well. Once again, she's way too kind. I was like, didn't you just learn not to, remember she said that great line after she slapped one of her council members? It's my fault you've forgotten to fear me. I was like, you're making the exact same mistake again with these new guys. A ruler should be, to a degree, feared. I mean, I appreciate Rhaenyra thinking things through, but, you have to feel that killing is on the table for this ruler. And then also she's giving these new dragon riders way too much access to herself and to her family. I mean, what have they really done so far? I mean, they claimed a dragon. That's very nice. Golf clap. Very nice. Kudos to you. But you guys will eat in the other room. You got to work your way up to the main room. I mean, you're not down with the small folk or in the bar anymore, right? So we've created a second eating time for you, right? I mean, you got to feel they still have rungs on the ladder of success to climb. Don't allow them to be so sure of themselves. You know who would have handled these dragon riders perfectly? And I can't wait for him to meet them? Daemon. This is something Daemon excels at. Look how he handled the gold cloaks, right? He's very well suited for the military over the monarchy. He would befriend these new dragon riders, but make sure they knew that he could cut them down at any moment. And he'd know when to be excited for them, but he'd also know when they were getting too excited and to make sure that they got less excited. I think Daemon is desperately needed to corral these new riders. Speaking of dragon riders, it seems Raina has finally found her mount, the rogue dragon in the Vale. And wow, what a weird, creepy looking dragon. I hope it just needs a bath. You were like, we found it. Ooh, what's wrong with it? It was like, it's like, my precious or whatever, right? I was like, ugh. It looked almost like a spider in some ways, which maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll get used to it. But at first I was like, what's wrong with your dragon, man? She's like, shut up, I have one. I don't want to hear about it. By the way, Nettles was a fan favorite character in the book, and it's long been suspected that Raina is getting Nettles' storyline, which makes sense in a way because it was rumored with Daemon that he was either Nettles' lover or father. Welcome to the House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones. And he is Raina's father, so it would make sense to merge those characters into one. Now, I'm glad that Nettles won't be Daemon's lover because I don't want to see Daemon out of line anymore. Like, we've already had that for 2 seasons. I want to see Daemon, doing a good job in the group, right? I mean, it's tiresome. I just want to see Daemon do what he's supposed to do. But at the same time, Nettles, I think it was important in the books that she was a female bastard. We haven't had one of those yet. And I think it would have been great to see a woman of the small folk rise up to Dragon Rider class. I think that would have been nice and important. Also, Nettles had a totally different personality than Raina. She was more like Daemon himself, but who knows? Maybe getting a dragon finally will change Raina. Like, look how Alan has finally come out of his shell. He's very angry. And it's interesting because Alan marries Bela in the books, but I think he'd be a better fit here with Raina, and that's a change that the show could easily make. In fact, I suspect, I haven't heard anything, but the way things are going, I think that they would. Alan was totally right in his criticisms of Corlys. And yeah, a lot of nobility did manage to still take care of their bastard children financially. Yet Corlys did nothing for his 2 sons that he clearly knew existed the whole time, and they were suffering greatly, and Corlys knew that as well. And, apparently rode by with his other kids and was like, haha, and you were like, that's awful, Corlys. And now Corlys still won't embrace his sons. I can't believe that Alan said all that to him and Corlys was like, upset about it? I was like, whoa, Corlys, I've been defending you. Even as they ride into battle, or in this case, row into battle, on a ship named after Corlys' dead wife who he cheated on, I'm like, what, buddy? Come on, let's be honest here, right? But I just thought it made this all very hard to like Corlys, especially because at this point, I see no downside in claiming Alan and Adam and giving them the station that they not only deserve by birth, but are so obviously worthy of as men. Like, these guys turned out so incredible and are just above and beyond. The fact that Corlys is still like, I don't know them, is weird. Likewise, Aemond is quickly becoming a very different character as well. Well, not so much different as cartoonish, as all the nuance is stripped out of him. Almost as if the show doesn't want fans to feel bad about what's going to, well, Helena knows what's going to happen to him. And she pretty much told Aemond and us this episode, which again, I thought was weird. But speaking of representing the monarch, Employee of the Month is clearly Sir Tyrion Lannister. What an ambassador to the pirates! Above and beyond, from negotiating with the pirates to give them the stepstones so they can charge a tariff on all trade coming in and out. I thought it was interesting that it mirrored current events. Like, yes, that will raise the prices of goods in manufacturing because of the extra price that has to be absorbed in the costs, etc. But anyway, the stepstones are where the crab guy was last season. But I thought this was a fine agreement. I agreed with Tyrion Lannister that he said okay. But I think he should have had one additional request, and that's that the crown has to approve any tariffs so that the tariffs don't get out of control. Put some kind of language in there that makes it okay. But I wouldn't be like, you can't just put any tariff you want on this. You can keep the whole tariff, but you got to clear it with us first. Anyway, Tyrion then agrees to fight the trans pirate captain, former YouTube philosopher Abigail Thorne turned actress. Excellent work here. I think she did a fantastic job. And he wins her respect, so much so that she wants him to father her children. And we find out that's by sleeping with her wives. And Tyrion, who also seems to be coming out of his shell, asks, how many wives does she have? It was great to finally see a different region of Westros. It's so big, yet we've spent so much of this House of the Dragon show in just one tiny corner of it. And it was largely CGI, but I still liked it. Although I thought it was weird that even when we went to such a different region, it was still largely white pirates. I would have preferred something more along the lines of Our Flag Means Death, another HBO Max show that highlighted the realities of who were actually pirates in the heyday of pirates. You know, it could have even been the actual cast of Our Flag Means Death, if I'm being honest with you. That would have been a fun way to give the show like a second life. And, you know, House of the Dragon just went full meta and said, you know, some characters acknowledging that they're a show on HBO. Why not bring in the actors from Our Flag Means Death? I mean, not that they would be as comedic and playing the exact same characters, but just to have them there, I think would have been, I mean, again, if you're doing the other stuff with the books, why not? I think it would have been a nice idea. And keep Abigail Thorne, though. I really like her. Speaking of meta, that ending. As I said, basically a pitch for season 3's budget. You know, we're short 2 episodes this season, and you can clearly see what they would be. Please, HBO and Warner Brothers Discovery, give us the money to do this right. I mean, it looks so incredible. And they can also use the, let's say, moderate but still very strong ratings for this season as further evidence that they need more money. Like, they haven't lost the audience, but the audience is wavering just a little bit. So we need to bring them back with money. They'll begin filming season 3 later this year, they say. They haven't even started yet. Season 2 wrapped in late September 2023 after 4 months of shooting, and it took 8 months to get to air. So we're looking at probably not getting season 3 until 2026, which is insane. Oh my God. That's going to be tough. And yet again, we can see here that they're saying that the attack on King's Landing is only 3 days away. So in 2026, you're going to have to feel like it's been just 3 days when in fact it's been over a year. And I hope they do a better job of creating that feeling, because when season 2 started, none of us got the idea that it had only been a few weeks since Viserys' death. If House of the Dragon does get the money, season 3 should open up with a bang. As I said, hopefully 2 episodes focusing on the battle at King's Landing. I wonder if they're going to continue with this ridiculous book situation. But it was thrilling to see all the pieces come together. The board finally set. Rhaenyra's dragons, Daemon's army, the passage that Jace had secured, used by the Starks of the North, which Jace had also secured when he was doing a good job, and the Valyrian navy. And on the other side, the Hightower forces are marching into position with Darren, that's his blue dragon flying above, Alicent's 3rd son. The Lannister forces, and now the pirate navy. But who's captured Otto Hightower? Not in the books, thank you very much. So nobody knows except for Ryan Condal and his writers. So I'm excited to see what's going on there. Those ravens couldn't find him for a reason. How did nobody report that he was missing? It's just incredible that after taking so long to set up the board, we now have to set it aside for over a year before we can play with it. What? But the place that I want to end this conversation is with a shout out to the people who make this show. Not the actors on screen nor the high profile writers and directors, but the production team and post-production team. If you head over to the Game of Thrones YouTube channel, as I said earlier in this episode, you can see these very long behind the scenes videos that they make that I've just discovered them and I think they're wonderful. And they show the movie level amount of work that goes into creating this show. And I hope that they do get the money for season 3 to do this setup justice, because clearly they have a wonderful production and post-production team that have the ability to deliver when given the right support. So what did you think of the House of the Dragon Season 2 finale? Book readers, what do you think of these changes? Everyone, what do you think of Season 2 basically just being one big setup for Season 3? And how do you feel about that journey now that you see where it's ultimately taken us? What do you think about how the way things have been set? And what do you think of House of the Dragon going so meta? Share those thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.